Zog Heilige Gemara. We're going to start from the beginning of the Mishnah that discusses the principle by Pigel that unless besides the Pigel issue, the carbon is pristine, it will not have the chumrah of Pigel to be chayav kors if you eat the meat. Zog the Mishnah, Zakla. This is the rule. Kol ha-shoichet v'makabel v'mahalach v'azayrik. These are the four avoiders in which Pigel can occur. Lechol, his kavana was lechol dover shedarkoi lechol ulahaktir dover shedarkoi lahaktir. This is according to the Rabbanan who hold dafke oichel, something you could eat, and being maktir, something you're supposed to be maktir, not vice versa. Kazayis, a minimum of a kazayis. Chutz limkoimoi posel bein beikaris, because that's what Shol calls piglet, and chutz lizmanoi, that's pigel godol. And therefore, it'll be also v'chayovinol of korish. If you eat this meat, it'll be chayav korish. Uvilvad sheyakriv hamater kimitzvasei. But everything else in the carbon, the whole process has to go perfectly, and then and only then. So pickle is an exclusive type of problem. It's only going to be a problem if it's exclusive. If there's any other problems, pickle is not there. Ketzad karev hamater kimitzvasei. What's an example of karev hamater kimitzvasei? Shachat v'shtika. So the shchita was kosher. And kibel v'holach v'zarek chutz l'zmanoi, and he had a kavan in one of these avodas of chutz l'zmanoi. So the only problem here is chutz l'zmanoi. Or sheshachat chutz l'zmanoi, or the shchita was chutz l'zmanoi, and the rest of the avodas were perfectly good. The kibel v'holach v'zarek v'shtika. Or sheshachat the kibel v'holach v'zarek chutz l'zmanoi zeu shemakriv hamater k'mitzvasei. I want to highlight something very important. That here clearly the discussion is only if in one avodah you had a good kavana, and in one avodah you had a pigel kavana. There's no mention here of within the same avodah having two kavanas, because it could have been an example. Shachar at the beginning of the shchita he thought choslas manoi, and at the end of the shchita he thought choslam koimai. That's not being entertained here. What's being entertained here is if a full avodah was choslas manoi. That's going to come to play. That's going to be the whole subject of today's Gemara. Again, all these examples are avoided by avoida. We're never looking at half avoidas. So there's already a problem of chuslam koimei there. And later on in the avoida, there was a chuslam koimei. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda is going to dispute this. Or HaPesach v'achata sheshachlan shaloi l'shmon. So there's a psul of shaloi l'shma. So it negates any possibility for the psul of pigel. The kibul v'holach v'zor chutz l'zmanoi. Or sheshachat chutz l'zmanoi. So even if the chutz l'zmanoi came first, and only afterwards kibul v'holach v'zor shaloi l'shmon. So the psul came later. Or sheshachat v'kibul v'holach v'zor davan shaloi l'shmon. These are examples of cases where the process of the carbon did not go pristine, and therefore any pickle that occurred either before or after the problem will not be valid. What about lechel kezayis bechutz, kezayis l'mocha? So here they're both machshavas are on the achila, but kezayis bechutz, kezayis l'mocha. I'm going to have one kezayis of chutz l'mkoimoi, and one kazayis chutz l'zmanoi, or first was kazayis l'mochar, and then kazayis b'chutz, or even if it's kechatzi zayis b'chutz, or kechatzi zayis l'mochar, or kechatzi zayis l'mochar, and then kechatzi zayis b'chutz. These are al-posel ve'ein b'karis, because in all of these examples, there's other problems with the carbon. It's not pristine because there's another psulir of chutz l'mkoimoi. Rabbi Yehuda, Ze'aklal, this is the rule. And Rabbi Yehuda is opening up our eyes to a new possibility. Kol shemachsheves hazman kodma lemachsheves hamakim. If it first became pigel with a chi of korish, with a chutz l'zmanoi, then a chutz l'mkoimoi machshava that comes later will not mess up the pigel. Therefore, it will be pigel v'chayovinol of karis. But v'machsheves hamokim kodol l'machsheves hazman. But if the carbon was already possible because of the machsheves chutz l'mkoimoi, so then it can no longer be pigel anymore. Possible v'mei karis. Now, I think it's important to speak out. The only time Rabbi Yehuda holds that if the chuslas manoi preceded the chuslam koimai, it will remain pigel. That's if the only subsequent psul was a machshav of chuslam koimai. But if they didn't spritz the dam, because the dam got spilled out, or they didn't do a halacha or kabbalah, or they did it shaloi shema, I'm sorry, not shaloi mechshava, but if they did it, if the avoida wasn't completed, I believe Rabbi Yehuda would also be moida, of course, that it won't be pigel. There's no chiyav misa, chiyav karish if you eat the meat. But the Chachamim, it doesn't make a difference if the psul machshava came before or after the chuslas manoi, regardless it's pigel. Zev is a possible bein bekaris. Today, that's what we're going to be talking about completely. We're going to be discussing the exact svara of the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim.
I know we're 30 blot into the Masechta, but we ever talked about Mezer to show you like what are they? What's their?
But pigel has to be mazed. How could you? I mean, you might not know that there's an issue to make pigel. But
is he just bipolar? Like
why would he do something like that?
Yeah.
If you would judge every Masechta by using why would someone do something like that, we wouldn't have the whole Dharm.
Well, if it was done with Mazid, we have to rely on him to open his mouth and say.
No. I thought so too, but we learned specifically that the machshava of pigel, any bad machshava has to be articulated by the kohen. If he just thought it and said, there wouldn't be pigel. He had to say, "I'm doing this with the intent of eating the meat chus l'zmanoi."
You learned that?
Yeah, we did learn it. I'll show you where we learned it. We learned it. In the last Mishnah. The Mishnah said a lashon of Omar, where there was a lashon of Omar and there was a shaila on the girsa. Let's see if we could find it. Maybe it's on Pavches Amar Aleph. There was a question of the girsa, and there was a whole discussion about it. But yeah,
I don't know how bad I am. If it was more than 2 days ago, I forgot it.
Where was it over here? We had it was just an Agavarcha. The case was that Omar. Let me see if I can find it. It was in there was a lotion of
the Omar that was around him understood what he was doing.
Yeah, he must have. Otherwise, how could you sue him? That's right.
Otherwise, how would you know? Forget about how would you sue him.
No, he could have told us. He could have told us. But even if he didn't tell us, we would have known.
He had to hear it too.
All right, we kept on saying Kansha Nosan Bishtika, Kansha Nosan Bamira. Right? We had that on the Chav Zayin and Aleph. So Kansha Nosan Bamira. And the Pshita Mugabetas changes it b'machshava. But the Mefarshim say the reason why I use the Lashon Amira is because the machshava is only considered the machshava to passel if it was articulate. Yeah. Okay. Zokti Mishnah weiter. Zev zeh passel be'mekos. Lechol kechatzi zayis lahaktir kechatzi zayis. So what if he only has a mind to eat a chatzi zayis chutz l'zmanoi and to be maktir chatzi zayis? Could you be mitzaref haktor to achila, kosher she'ein achila v'aktor mitzaref? That's two different things. So Omar Ilfa. So Ilfa says the following comment: we have a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chacham. The machlokes is only b'shtei avodas. Where does Rabbi Yehuda say that the avoda is possible and it's going to be a pigel of chutz l'zmanoi? That's if the first avoda only had a psul of chutz l'zmanoi, and by the next avoda he put in the psul of chutz l'zmanoi. Avol ba'avoda achas. But what if he had a machshava of chutz l'zmanoi and chutz l'koimoi in one avoda? Divrei hakoil ear of machshavas. There clearly it's mixed together. So at the same time as the chutz l'zmanoi, the chutz l'koimoi occurred. There, even Rabbi Yehuda would be moida that that's not a pristine carbon. If the machshavas of chutz l'koimoi was only in the next avoda, then the first machshava was pure and pristine, and the later avoda of chutz l'koimoi won't have an impact. But if in the same avoda he had both, so then while it was chutz l'zmanoi, it was chutz l'koimoi, and therefore he would be moida. That is the shita of Ilfa. But Rabbi Yochanan Amar af b'avoda achas machlokes. Even if by one avoda he had a machshava chutz l'zmanoi or chutz l'koimoi, Rabbi Yehuda would still maintain that it's only chutz l'zmanoi, and you'll say the chutz l'zmanoi was first, and we look at it like a chutz l'zmanoi and pasal's pigel. You got to scratch our heads. Why? So Rashi tells us that this opens us up to a huge discussion, which the Gemara is going to open up soon. But let's just have a look at the words of Rashi. The first wide line, af b'avoidachas machlokes, the islay Rabbi Yehuda twice lashon rishon. once again, you see he's speaking it out.
Oh.
He said, chutz lizmanoi, chutz l'mkoimoi. So Rabbi Yehuda says you ignore the chutz l'mkoimoi, it's purely chutz lizmanoi. So this is a new chiddush. Not only does Rabbi Yehuda say that a psul that comes later is not a problem, but even if he says two psulim together, you're toughest loss on Rishon. So really, Rabbi Yehuda is subscribing to two separate halachas that comprises his shita. A is that if the chutz lizmanoi came first, we don't say that it loses its champigol, and a new halacha of when someone says two things together, you say tzvoi shloshon rishon, which is a big machlokes that the Gemara is going to get into. Okay, so
here, but throughout Shas.
that the Gemara is going to introduce the Shas sugya of that. That's right. So that is the machlokes. So Zok Gemara bishlama le'ilfa, according to Ilfa, who learns that the machlokes is only by shtei avodos, it makes sense. Midareisha b'shtei avodos, seifam nami b'shtei avodos. As we spoke out, as we're learning the Mishnah, we're all speaking about different avodas, right? If he was shachat, shalei b'zmanoi, and in kibel balach shalei b'koimoi, we're discussing one machshava per avodah. So it carries through that Rabbi Yehuda's discussion was under the same circumstances as the earlier part of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who say that Rabbi Yehuda says is halacha, even if it was in one. So when Rabbi Yehuda said Zak Klal, it's even if it was in one avodah, Reisha b'shtei avodas b'seifa v'avodah achas. Wouldn't the Mishnah have to specify that we're changing scenarios here and we're speaking about even avodah achas? It doesn't say that. Zok to Gemara, the Gemara is very bold in Kachim, and the Gemara says, yeah, as a matter of fact, that's exactly what it is. Like we had Shmuel as well, right? In Reisha b'shtei avodas seifa. Bein ba'avodah achas, bein b'shtei avodas. Right there, we had Reisha Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that you cannot go on to eat, which is why you have to be makter.
That's a much bigger case than this one. This one is just saying that
because it's extending it to an additional case.
Right, it's just saying.
So the reason why he argued by shtei avodos is because that's what we're talking about. But Avada, he holds that it continues as well. That's right. That's right. Zok to Gemara, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, our Mishnah. Zaklal, machshavas hazman kadma lemachshavas hamakoim tigol v'chayav v'nolav kares. Frank to Gemara, Bishlam Rabbi Yochanan, Bishlam according to Rabbi Yochanan, who holds are even arguing by one avodah when both machshavas occurred, and he's working with twice lashon and rishon. Hani the katani zaklal. Because whenever the Mishnah says Zaklal, the Gemara always asks Zaklal Lasuya Mai. So it's Lasuya that this halacha even applies to one avodah. El Leilva Mai Zaklal. What additional information that we wouldn't have been aware of from what Rabbi Yehuda himself said originally? Don't we know? Think of something. It'll be okay. Tanan Hasam Harezu Tumur Shayla. So now we're getting into the Shas Sugya of the main Shas Sugya of Tfais Lashon Rishon. So we know that halacha is by Tamura. If someone has an oila and he takes a chulin animal and he stands it beside the oila, and he says, "Rezu Tamuras oila," the second animal that he was mekadosh has the same din as the first animal. They're both oilas. If he does that to a shlamim, then it'll become a shlamim. Well, what if he has an oila over here and a shlamim here, and he brings another animal? He has Rezu oila shlamim, has Rezu Tamuras oila shlamim. So what is it? So Tanan Asam, I Rezu Tamuras oila Tamura shlamim. So he said Tamura Shayla, Tamura Shalom. Very important to note that he mentioned the word Tamura twice. Hareza Tamuras Oila Diver Reb Meir. Because Reb Meir holds to face Lashon Rishon. He said two things. It can't be both. It can't be Tamuras Oila and Tamura Shalom. So we say that it becomes the first. We say that automatically the first thing that he said was Toifis. You hear now the connection between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda, because Reb Yehuda is saying the same thing. However, Diver Reb Meir. Rabbi Yosy said, "Im lekach nischaven tchila." If what he really wanted was shlomim and oila, it's just that you can't say both words together. So since a person cannot physically say shamar v'zacher b'dibur echad, so therefore hayil v'yevshir lo'itish te shemus ka'echas devar of kayam. What does devar of kayam mean? It can't be a tumur oil, tumur shlomim. So what you do is we say they're both chal simultaneously. Tumur oil, tumur shlomim. You wait till this animal gets a mum. You sell it, and with half the money, you buy a carbon oil, and with half the money, you buy a carbon shlama. So, Devorav Kayamin. The Misha Amar Harezu Tumuras Oila. But what if he said Harezu Tumuras Oila, and then he changed his mind? So clearly he didn't want both. He wanted one, and then he changed his mind. Vinimlach the Amar Harezu Tumuras Shlamim. Sure, Harezu Oila, because once it becomes a Tumuras Oila, there's no more room on this animal for the Tumuras Shlamim to be chal. So correct the Gemara Shaila. Iboilahu. So the Gemara is still setting up the discussion.
Both Rabbi Yosy shitas, he says you can do both.
If when the guy says I raised it tomorrow, no, since someone said I raised it, so how will you know if it was?
Yeah.
Oh, the Gemara is going to elaborate soon. But one thing for sure, when someone said Tamuras Oil, Tamuras Shlamim, the way we're going to interpret it is that he wanted to say both together, but he was unable to. And the Gemara is going to have a discussion. If he wanted to say both together, he should have said, I raised it Tamuras Oil Shlamim. Why did he say Tamura again? Okay, so that's going to be a discussion. But for now, let's take it on its face value that when he said Tamuras Oil, Tamuras Shlamim, he was trying to say them both at the same time. Iboilu. What about Harezu Tumuras Oila Ushalam? So there he's pretty much saying beferish that he wants them both to be chal together. What would Reb Meir hold? Because Reb Meir's the Tfais Lashon Rishon, that's if I said one and then the other. But if I specifically said I want them to be both together, then you don't say Tfais Lashon Rishon. So would Reb Meir be moed? Or what if I said Mau Lechatzois? I said I want Chati to be Oila and Chati to be Shlamim. There you can't say Tfais Lashon Rishon, it should be a Noida. Ma, what would be the law? Or you might say no. The first half is challah ba'oila, and it spreads automatically because kachim spreads. So let's see Rashi. Rashi explains the shaila perfect. Iboilu hareishu tumush oila u'shalam emau. Mi amrina, do we say ha the polygraph mayor the amar tvois lashon rishon is mishum the amar tumuras trezimni, and therefore vavalei kanimlach. And the fact is that tamura a second time shows that he's not trying to add on to what he's saying. He changed his mind. That's for sure. Chadi burahu, and maybe even Reb Meir would be moed of it harvayu chayli, and then you would just have to sell it and buy oil and shlamim with it. Oidama twice lashon rishon la oilam. Your twice lashon rishon la oilam, even when he puts them both together, and you say that the oila schal the moment he said tumuras oila and upashta kedushas oila bechula. That's not a din of twice lashon rishon. That's a din in kachim. That once the kedushas oila takes hold in this animal, it spreads. And by the time he said shlamim, it's too late. There was no more room. The sulo yasi shlamim v'chaydu. So my words might mean I want the shlamim to be chal, but it doesn't make a difference. Once I said temuras oila, there is no more any room on this animal to accept shlamim. Or lachtos mau im tim shalomer pashta kedushas oila b'chula. In the case where he said oila first, now we have a bigger shayla. Omar Hare Behemazu Lechatzois Aloila Ula Shlamimai. So now I'm fair saying I don't want it to spread. I bedavka want it to be happy. So Hai Chadiburu, do you say it's one dibur? And therefore the oila can't get in there first and spread because they both come at the same time. Vein Zachal Beloizeh. They're either it's all or nothing. My dibur says they both have to be chal. Oidilma, given the pashta bepalga pashta bekula v'loy asu shlomim v'chayim.
Is there a concept like that? If I without tamura?
Yes, if you're a makish the foot of a carbon,
the whole.
I think it's an Abrish and Shabbat Tzliya, but I think if you makish part of, if you make something from Shabbat, it spreads. Yeah. So that's not a new thing. So Frank the Gemara. Now we're going to relate it to our sugya, and here's where it gets a little bit complicated. So Yibaylu, Harezu Tumur, Shayla Tumuris. Shlamim Mau, Lachtos Mau. Omer Abaye, Zokt Abaye, Baha Vadai Moeder Reb Meir. I hold that Reb Meir would be Moeder because in this case you cannot say Tfais Lashon Rishon, and since you cannot say Tfais Lashon Rishon, you're going to have to say that it's 50-50. He's Moeder Reb Yosy. Rav Omer no, Adayin he Machloikas. It's still a Machloikas. Reb Meir would maintain Sai by Lachtos, Sai by Tumuris Oilo Ushlamim that it's only oil. Omar lay Rava Labai. A Rava told Abaye, Lididach to Amrit Bahabade Moide Rab Meir. You who hold that Rab Meir would agree. In this case, you don't say Tfais Lashon Rishon. How are you going to understand Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah? Hare Shchita Delechi Lachzoistami. It's like Lachzoistami because it's all one avoida, and in one avoida what are you saying? That he in one avoida he had kavana for chutlas manoi and chutzlim kaimai, upligi and upligi, and they're arguing by one avoida. I guess according to Rabbi Yochanan, Zok Rashi, Shchita de katani maslisin lechel kazais l'mocher kazais b'chutz the chilach tami the lav mi heder imluch. He's not changing his mind over here. How do I know he's not changing his mind?
Very specific.
But it's more than that. Because Shirei Kamakazaysim Yeshba. It's very easy to have both machshavos. Tomorrow's island, tomorrow's Shlomim contradict each other. But Chutzlas Mana and Chutzlam Kaimai don't contradict because the animal has a many kazaysim. It's possible that you could do Chutzlas Mana and Chutzlam Kaimai. So by definition, shechting an animal can accommodate two different kavanas. So therefore, V'chadiburi is one dibur, Upligi, and they argue in this case, according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Ka'amar Rabbi Yehuda tfois lashon rishon. Even in this case, he said that it's you only look at it as a machshav chutzlas manoi, and you ignore the machshav of chutzlam kaimai. Rabbi Meir de Tmura b'shita Rabbi Yehuda de masnizin kai, and we'll see soon. The Gemara is going to tell us that the shita of Rabbi Meir of tfois lashon rishon is not his own independent svara. He's actually adapting Rabbi Yehuda's svara. So if he is actually a representation of Rabbi Yehuda, how could you, Abaya, learn Pshat and Reb Meir, a Pshat that wouldn't be compatible with Rabbi Yehuda? The Armini Mishmaitz and Reb Meir, B'shitas Rabbi Yehuda Amra. So if that's the case, the way you understand Abaye, in the case of Akavad of Chutz Mana and Chutz Paima in the Shechita itself, according to you, Rabbi Yehuda should agree that it's not Pigel, but in fact, Rabbi Yehuda holds it is Pigel. So that was the kasha that Rabbi asks about. A good kasha. Zok to Gemara, that's not true. Amalei Abai said, I don't have your kasha. Me Savris, you're assuming that Shechita is one avoida. And if it's all one avoida, now in one avoida you have two kavanas. But that really very much up to discussion. Amalei me Savris ain't Shechita ela b'sayf. You're telling me that what happened when you add your shechting the animal, it's zero nishchat. And when you cut the last roiv of the roiv of the second siman, boom, the whole shkita happens in one fell swoop, and therefore it's one avoida that has two machshavas in it. That's not what it is at all. Rather, we hold yeshna l'shchita mitchila v'atzayif, meaning each siman that you shecht is a shchita in and of itself. Umishna seinu, you know where Rabbi Yehuda says that when in one shchita, if you have two machshavas, it will the first machshav is chutzlas manai by itself, and therefore it passes as pigel, even though later on there's a machshav of chutzlas manai. It's the Amar Siman Rishon chutzlas manai, and there was no mixture, there was no other kavanah. It was exclusively chutzlas manai for the first half of the shechita, and Siman Sheni what's chutzlas manai. So Ibazoi, you don't have a kash anymore, because by lachetzois maybe Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda would agree. By Tumuras Oila Ushlamim, maybe he would agree that since they have to be at the same time, they're coming at the same time. But here, even in the one avodah, you can actually separate it to two not concurrent but consecutive machshavas. Okay, so you weaseled your way out of the shechita. But what about kamitza? Hare kamitza, it's one action. You can't split the kamitza in half. It's all one action. Hare kamitza the lechi lachtois tami. That's mamish similar to the lachtois by Tamura upligi. And we happen to know as a fact that they are arguing by kamitza. And Rabbi Yehuda said over there, even by a kamitza, he said tefois lashon rishon. And in a kamitza, if he had a kavanah of chutzlas mana and chutzlam kaimai, Rabbi Yehuda also would be pigel. Zok Gemara, Hasam Nami, the Omar, Kaimet Mincha Chutlas Manoi, Kairet Levana Chutlam Kaimai. There's two matirin to the Mincha. There's the Kmitza, which is not, you can't separate that. But besides being makrib the Kmitza on the Mizbeach, you also have to be makrib some Levina on the Mizbeach. So when they had this machloikis by Kmitza, he didn't mean only the Kmitza, he meant the whole presentation to the Mizbeach. So the kamitza was fully chutzlas manoi, no mix in there of chutzlam kaimai, and the hakravis hakaret shalavayna was the chutzlam kaimai. So again, we don't have a case that's similar to the halacha of Tumurish Oilu Shlomim or Lachtzos. Freit the Gemara, that's a Kmitza that comes with Levina. But there are certain Menachos that there is no Levina with them. Hare Kaimet the Minchas Choite, the Lek Levina Bahade. A Kaimet of a Minchas Choite, there's no Levina. Well, Pligi, you know they're arguing by Kmitza, including this type of Kmitza. You know what? Abai said, nah, Loi Pligi. You're right. I'm in that case of a Kaimet Shal Mincha, that Taka wouldn't argue, and Yehuda would agree that it's not Potzal al Spigel, because the Chutas Manoi and the Chutam Kaimai are mixed together in one Avodah. Yes, you have a right that they argue about Kmitza, but the Kmitza that they argue about is a Kmitza by a normal Korban Mincha where there is Levina brought. Omer Bashi, Zok Bashi, Im Tim Saloimar, Kligi, I have a way to say that they can even be arguing by the Mincha that has no Levina. So how are you going to split that up into two avodas? Zok Gemara, because they're arguing not by the Kmitza but by the Halacha. Kligi B'Ptzias. Each step is a different step. By one step, he had a kavana of chutz l'zmanoi, by the first step, and by the second step, he had a kavana of chutz limkaimoi. Let's have a quick look at Rashi.
Step from when he did the Knesset until he put it on the Mizbeach?
Yeah, let's see Rashi. Pligi b'psis uvemachshavas haylacha. The Omar b'psir rishayna chutz l'zmanoi. Again, the Omar. You see, he keeps saying the Omar. The Omar b'psir rishayna chutz l'zmanoi. Uvepsir shniya Omar chutz limkaimoi. The havalu trade dibur. So that's how we can get out of this problem. Okay, developing. Rab Simi bar Ashi masni kid Abaye. He learned like Abaye that lachzois, according to Rab Yehuda, lachzois according to Rab Meir, we say they're both chabal basachas, and you don't say tvois loshen rishain. And Rab Huna bar Nosan masni kid Rava that even in this case you say tvois loshen rishain. Zok Gemara. Yosy Rabdimi Amar Rab Meir Amar Yosy Rabdimi Amar Rab Meir B'Shittas Rab Yehuda Amra. This is what Rashi referred to a while ago. That you should know Rab Meir Shita in the Mishnah by Tamura is all dependent on Rabbi Yehuda's halacha that we just learned over here. That tvois lashon rishon. The Amar tvois lashon rishon. Ditnan we learned Amar Rabbi Yehuda. So now in the sugya of Tamura, Rabdimi is referencing our sugya. We're home team now. Ditnan Amar Rabbi Yehuda Zeklal. Then it will be pigel. The chayav and ala kares, and this type of pigel will invoke a chiyuv of kares. Omer le Abaye. So Abaye told Rabdimi, I think you have wrong pshat. Because Rabbi Bar Chana argues, and according to him, that will not be pshat in Reb Meir. Because the Omer Rabbi Bar Chana, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, when you really figure things out, to really understand what the real machlokes is between Reb Meir and Reb Yosy, you're going to see they're not arguing at all about tvois lashon rishain. And now the Gemara is going to say what Shlomi mentioned earlier. When you really think about it, kimagaslu rashis imtirza lekarves tevreim kroivim emliya shavim. If you really want to find the absolute fine point that they're arguing on, but bring them together in everything else. If you really look at it closely, Reb Meir, Reb Yosef, there's no machlokes at all. What do you mean loy pligi? We know there's no machlokes. The loy pligi v'amiv loy pligi. Amen, you're right. Pligi b'may the pligi, v'loy pligi b'may the loy pligi. Yes, they're arguing about one fine point, but don't blow their machlokes up. Their whole machlokes is narrowed down to one fine point, and don't make their machlokes bigger than it needs to be. The Omer Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef, let me tell you what fine point they're arguing on. Everybody doesn't hold of, nobody holds of tvois lashon rishon, and I'll tell you what it is. The Omer Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef, Omer Rabbi Yochanan, Hakoyel Moedim, Sai Rab Meir, and Try Rab Yosef Moeda. Heicha the Omer Tocholzu, the Achakach Tocholzu. If you beferish wanted it to be consecutive, first the Tumuras Oila Shabichal, and then the Tumuras Shlomo Kabichal. Everybody agrees. Divrakal loy sochel. Divrakal loy chayla. Everybody would agree that the oila is chal, the shlom is not chal, and even Rabbi Yosy agrees that if he said beferish, I want oila first, and then shlomim about the oila is chal, not shlomim, like we said right away at the beginning, because if he's changing his mind, you can't change your mind once the oila is chal, it's too late. If they both agree, if someone said loy sochel zu. If the guy stipulated beferish, I want bedavka both together. Divrei hakoil chayla. Everybody holds that they're both chal together, meaning Zok Rashi, V'tira v'yehi demei chetcha oila demei chetcha shlam. It's half and half. The way Rabbi Yosy, right? So keep pligi, the fine, simple case where there is a disagreement between Rabbi Yosy and Rabbi Meir is the Amar Tumuras Oila Tumuras Shlam. So this can be interpreted in two different ways. Exactly what Shlomi was pointing out earlier. Rabbi Meir Savar, if he really wanted them to both be chal together, if that was his intention, he should have said, if he wanted them both to be chal together, the simplest way to say that is tumuras oilu shlamim. Yet he didn't say that. The Omar tumuras oila tumuras shlamim. He spoke out the word tumura a second time. That tells you that it's not a question of twice lashon rishon. When he said two things together, twice lashon rishon, we're not talking about that. But here, by saying tumuras oila tumuras shlamim, he's clearly saying I want to be an oila first. He clearly said only oila first, then he changed his mind where it's too late. So it's not a question of twice lashon rishon anymore. So this has nothing to do with the machlokes of Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, where it's a discussion of twice lashon rishon. Because Rameir never spoke about twice lashon rishon. He just said when a guy says this, obviously what he means is that he wants to more oila. Rabbi Yosy Amar, no, this is a lumdish guy. Rabbi Yosy, Amar Tamuras Oila Ushlamim. You know why he didn't say Tamuras Oila Ushlamim? I'll tell you why he didn't say it. You're telling me, your mayor, it's a raya that he wanted first the Oila, then he changed his mind. No. He wanted them both to be together. So you're asking me he should have Tamuras Oila Ushlamim? No, because this guy is an Amoritz. This guy who said Tamuras Oila Ushlamim is an Amoritz. And he didn't know the impact of his words. However, he wrongfully thought that if he would say Tamuras Oila, Tamuras Shlamim, then what he would be saying was Palga Tamuras Oila, Upaga Tamuras Shlamim. And why didn't he want to say that? Because he thought if he would say that, it wouldn't work at all. Because you can't have half and half. So he thought he wouldn't be chal. So he thought he'd be a lamdin. And I'll say both in a different way, and then it'll both work. L'hachi Omar Tamuras Oila Tamuras Shlamim Lememra. So he in his balabatasha karama mind, he would think the kula the kula shamhava, since he's making each one kula, so it'll make them both bichal. The truth is nothing works, but he's angered at that this would be a better way to say it, and that's why he's saying it. But what he really meant was Tamuras Oila and Shlam together, not to be chayzer, and therefore Rabbi Yosy they're both chal. So basically, Abaye says, how could you tell me, Rav Dimi, that the machlokes is in Rabbi Yehuda about twice lashon rishon? If you look at Rabbi Bar Chana, the machlokes has nothing to do with twice lashon rishon. It has to do with someone who used the word Tamuras or Tamuras Shlam. What was he thinking? So you know what Abaye said? Similar to what Begin once said. Amalei who Amalei pligi? No, he said that they're not arguing. Rabbi Dimi said that they're not arguing about Rabbi Yehuda. I'm sorry, Rabbi Bachana says they're not arguing about Rabbi Yehuda. I'm happy with it. So now we have two ways to understand the machlokes Rabbi and Rabbi Yosy. Is it a machlokes in what a guy thinks when he's saying Tamuras Oila, Tamuras Shlamim, or is it a shayla of twice lashon rishon? Beautiful.
But aren't we saying that according to that shot, Rameir is saying that if you say
according to the second shot that we learned, Rabbi Bachana
now, yeah,
right?
The mayor says if you say Tamuras Oila, Tamuras Shlamim, then Mahada go Hodabay.
Right, so that's not called twice lashon rishon.
Why not?
Because twice lashon rishon means
why can't I say that I actually made a mistake? Whoops.
No, if I say whenever when twice lashon rishon means I meant to say both. I wanted to say both, but it doesn't. You can't say it doesn't work. Automatically, the first one goes. It's not twice lashon rishon doesn't mean.
So what?
Let me make it clear. Rashi makes it clear. Rashi says as follows, and we'll see the Rashi inside. Twice lashon rishon does not mean when someone says two things, he meant the first thing. No, when someone says two things, it doesn't matter what he meant. You automatically chop the first thing. Here we're saying, no. Let's see what he meant. Where Meir holds, when he said Tamuras Oila, Tamuras Shlamim, he meant to say Oila first. So twice lashon rishon is not because we're saying that's what he meant. That's a rule that whenever.
So what do we do with lashon of Tamuras Shlamim? Like what is that? What
the guy was trying to do is he first made it Tamuras Oila. Then he changed his mind and wanted to make it Tamuras Shlamim. No, it doesn't work. He tried to do something that doesn't work. What if he made it Tamuras Oila and the next day he says, I changed my mind, I want it Tamuras Shlamim? It wouldn't work. So if he changes his mind a second later, or if he changes his mind a day later, it's the same thing. So Rashi points this out very carefully. So let's look at Rashi.
Yeah, the last thing you have shared, it says very clearly that it's not possible.
No, I want to I want to focus on that. Tvois Lasharishan is alumnus, and we're talking about a machlokes what the guy meant. So I'm looking at the first skinny line in Rashi. B'mai loy pligi, v'hai loy pligi dekamar hachi, v'hai loy pligi dekamar hachi kamar. Loy pligi b'tvois lashon rishon. They're not arguing on a halacha shaila. Do you chapam this first lashon? Ella, they're arguing about b'daitei de gavra by chachas dibur el machshavtoi. We're merely having a machlok is about what this guy meant. When we analyze the words that he said, what do those words mean? We both look at what he wanted to say. Tvois Lasharisha means I don't care what he wanted to say. Since this came out of his mouth, that's what happens. Now Rabbi says, no, you look at what he said. There's just a difference in opinion between Rabbi and Rabbi Yosy, what this guy really meant. And the reason why you can't just ask him, right? The reason why you can't just ask him is because what if he says, I meant whatever the word said? Like many politicians say, I gave a statement. That's what I meant, right? So how do you touch these words? Okay, Zok to Gemara Vayta. Omar Ula V'Temer Rab. I wanted to tell until you asked me this question now. I didn't chap what Rashi meant to say that they're not arguing with Tvois Lasharishan, they're arguing with Kavana. But as we're having this discussion, it comes out more clear. So next time I say, sure, I might note. Omar Ula V'Temer Rab Oishia. Now this is where, to me, this was very difficult to understand, but maybe now I'll be able to give it over better. Omar Ula V'Temer Rab Oishia. Does can anybody help me out over here? I want to know what pshat in our Mishnah. Does our Mishnah say kezayis tnan? Or kezayis tnan? The Mishnah said that you had kavanah kezayis chutz l'zmanoi and kezayis chutz l'plegnoi. So what did he say? Did he say kezayis chutz l'zmanoi? Which sounds more like a consecutive type of language. And maybe Dafka over there, did Rabbi Yehuda say that first it became chus l'zmanoi, and therefore it became pigel, and later on, but a second kizai is chus l'mkoimoi, it becomes chus l'mkoimoi, but it won't stir the pigel anymore, because chus l'zmanoi was an exclusive kavanah. Or maybe he even said a bigger chiddush, or maybe even kizayis ukazayis. If someone says kazayis chutz l'zmanoi ukazayis chutz l'mkoimoi, it very much sounds like he's trying to make it into one machshava. Would Rabbi Yehuda even there separate the machshavas? So that's what he wanted to know. So let me ask Yubav Liam. Let's see if Yubav Liam know the Mishnah well. Was it kazayis tnan, or was it kazayis ukazayis tnan, which is a bigger chiddush in Rabbi Yehuda that he separates the two machshavas? Zog to Gemara. The Gemara fears the impact of the Shaila. Kazayis Tnan, were surely two consecutive machshavas. Albo Kazayis Ukazayis Jivra Kol Erev machshavas have. Even Rabbi Yehuda would be moided that it's two machshavas in one Kazayis, and therefore it wouldn't be pigel. Oidilma Kazayis Ukazayis Tan, and even according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Yehuda Prata have. Even if it said Kazayis Ukazayis, it's still separating the machshavas, and there still is an exclusive, standalone, independent chutz l'zmanoi, and then the choshkin kazayis are two separate machshavas. That was the shaila that Rabbi Oishia asked of the Bavliim. So Zog to Gemara, Toshma, let me see if I can bring a raya to boy mine Levi me Rebbe. Levi asked Rebbe the following shaila. Now, Rab Shimon was Rebbe's son. Levi was not Rebbe's son. Levi was one of the Talmidim of Rebbe. So, boy mine Levi me Rebbe. What would happen if Chishev lechol kezayis lemachar b'chutz? On one kezayis, he said, I'm going to eat this kezayis lemachar chutz l'zmanoi, and I'm going to eat the same kezayis chutz l'zmanoi outside of the Azar. Now it's even worse than kezayis ukazayis, because now I'm mamish combining them. What would Rabbi Yehuda hold over there? Mao. Would Rabbi Yehuda hold over there that that's already one machshava? That already won't be pigel.
And obviously, Lamocha is Chutz.
That's right.
Whatever the case may be.
Right. And he said Chutz first. He said Lamocha b'chutz. So the Chutz has to be first.
No, he said Lamocha. Lechol is Lamocha.
Right. So Lamocha is first, and b'chutz is second. Right. He didn't say b'chutz Lamocha. He said Lamocha b'chutz. Right. Now, Amalei Rebbe said that already crosses a red line. First of all, Zu Shela, Now, dus is gefragt, get the Shala. So right away he complimented Levi. Levi, bist du dus is get the Shala. You're going to get a note home to your parents that you were the best Talmid Hashavua this week. Right, you get a nachas from him. Dan zinot gefragt, Shala. Wow, you should be proud of him. But I'll tell you the answer. Eruv machshava sabi. There, Rabbi Yehuda would already agree. This is mamish one achila. It's one machshava. It wouldn't be picked. Omar lefanav Reb Shimon. Rebbe. So Rebbe's son told Rebbe, "Why are you making such a big deal about Levi? Why should he be Talmid Hashavua? I'm not impressed. It's so easy." Loy Mishnah saying, "No, he isn't that a Meforsh in Mishnah. Why do you're complimenting him that has great chiddush? No great chiddush. It's a Meforsh in the Mishnah. Lechel hizayis bechutz, hizayis lemachar." Or the Mishnah says, "Kizayis lemachar, kizayis bechutz," or kechatzi zayis bechutz, kechatzi zayis lemachar, or kechatzi zayis lemachar, kechatzi zayis bechutz. These are all cases in our Mishnah. Pasul vein bekaris. So it's beferish. So this is pasul vein bekaris. I'm sorry.
The original kasha was kazayis ukazayis. Right,
you're saying very good. Pasul vein bekaris is the chachamim, and in this very case that we're quoting, Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's pigel. Rabbi Yehuda, the case that we just quoted, Kazayis Bechutz Kazayis L'Mocher, Rabbi Yehuda in this case argues. This is where Rabbi Yehuda argues, and he says that it is pigel. So it's prata. It's not a year of machshavas. So since it only speaks out this case, Rabbi Shimon to his father, the Tana should have said Kazayis Bechutz L'Mocher. You see, the Tana is very careful when it's expressing the case. It's a separate Kazayis for Chutz and separate Kazayis L'Mocher. If in fact Rabbi Yehuda argues, even if it was one kazayis that he was eating l'mocher b'chutz, why isn't that case in the Mishnah? So from the fact that the Tana was so specific to mention all these cases and purposely omitted the case of kazayis and l'mocher and chutz, vice the chosh there Rabbi Yehuda would be moed. Ha'idach irv machshavas havi. So he told his father, how come you're making Levi Talmid Hashavua? I'm not impressed. I figured it out from the Mishnah. It wasn't such a great shayla g'loisa gedilla. Omer lei. So Rebbe told Reb Shimon, you know too much. You know why? Because you're my son. I tell you all the information. But in yeshiva, not everybody gets all the information. So you're coming to be pushed the Shiloh because you had access to more information than he had access to. And let me tell you the information that he had access to. And for him, it's a gewaltige Shiloh. Why? Amalei, who shall I be? He asked me, who shall Leni? He asked me, Dover Chachma. He asked me a gewaltige Chachma. Amrit Mishnah Seinu, when you tell me it's Pashit, it's not Pashit at all. Now, Lididach, for you, Rebbe, Reb Shimon Mantai Rezin, Das Nisach Tarti, I told you beferish that not only, the Shiloh we asked earlier, not only is Rabbi Yehuda saying is halacha by Kazayis, but Rabbi Yehuda is also saying is halacha by Kazayis, ukazayis. According to you, loy koshalach, because if I spoke with Kazayis, and Kazayis ukazayis, but not the same kazayis, you were able to make such a deal and tell me vice the chois, that case is not where Rabbi Yehuda argues. But lididei the lo yasanya elachada. I didn't tell him both cases of kazayis and kazayis ukazayis. I only told him one of those two cases. Which of those two cases the Gemara is going to discuss? But I only told him one of those two cases, so he didn't have all the information that you had. Now, what happened? Levi comes into the Besmedrash, and he only heard one of the two cases, right? Vishaminu l'Rabbanon, he came into yeshiva, and he heard the Olam talking about both cases. The Kogarsi Tarti. So he wasn't sure, did my Rebbe tell me the same thing he told the rest of the Talmidim, only one case, and they added a second case on their own, which I could argue with? Or maybe Rebbe Taka told them two cases, but he forgot to tell me one of the two cases. That was Levi Sofik. V'sovar didi davka. Maybe my Rebbe only said one of the two cases. V'didhu ir of machshavas ava, and the case of kazayis ukazayis would be ir of machshavas. So maybe my Rebbe told me kazayis. He didn't say kazayis ukazayis. And maybe what the Rebbe told me was accurate, that only kazayis will Rabbi Yehuda argue. But by kazayis ukazayis, he wouldn't argue. Oidilma, or maybe didhu dafke. Maybe my Rebbe told them kazayis and kazayis ukazayis. And ulididi shiyurish sharli. And he left over. He didn't tell me the second case. And since he left out a case, right? He definitely left out a case because he meant kazais, and kazais ukazais. If he meant both cases and he only left out and he left one out, if he left one out, maybe he left two out. Maybe he left out another case, and that is in one kazais if he said lemochar b'chutz. If your whole raya, Reb Shimon, is from the fact that in the Mishnah there's a comprehensive list. So if one is missing, you have a big raya. But Levi was choshid that it's not a comprehensive list because there might be other items on the list that Rebbe didn't tell him about. Once there might be other items on the list that Rebbe didn't tell him about, well, maybe this is also one that owns on the list. So therefore, don't tell me, my son Reb Shimon, that Levi is not a big chacham. Levi is a gewaltige chacham. You know why Levi is a gewaltige chacham? Because he didn't have all the information that you had. You had all the information, so you were able to make a dik. Two cases out of three were listed, one's not listed. Oh, it must be that case Rabbi Yehuda's moida. But he didn't have that information. So for him, it was a gewaltige raya. So now we have to retroactively figure out, so how did he know? How Taka did Levi know? Right? Levi Taka didn't know. But we're going to see how he got his answer. So now we're going to see an ingenuity. What you learn from this Gemara, we're going to learn in the second, is you don't only look at the words that your Rebbe spoke, you have to look at the tone of voice in which he spoke it and analyze his facial expressions. And that also is going to be part of what he's teaching you. And let's look at this.
I learned that if you come late to shir, don't ask coffee.
I learned if you come late to a job, you have to bring coffee. Zok Gemara, v'hai yisanya. So we've been talking about one case was mentioned to Levi, one case wasn't. Let's see if we can figure out which case Rebbe taught Levi and in which case Rebbe didn't teach Levi. Ilema kazayis ukazayis asanya. If the case that was taught to Levi was kazayis ukazayis, and he told him that hayla then ikazayis ukazayis asanya haylab shiyuru. He didn't leave anything over. Because if even by a case of kazayis ukazayis, Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's two separate machshavas, for sure kazayis ukazayis was two separate machshavas. So what do you mean that he left out a case for Levi? By saying kazayis ukazayis, that's automatically including kazayis. So therefore he should have also been able to be medayik that if he wanted one kazayis lemocher b'chutz would Rabbi Yehuda would be moida. Halav shiru. Elo, what must have happened was kazayis asanya. The only case that Rebbe taught Levi was the case of kazayis, and therefore v'tiboyle kazayis ukazayis. He had a suffix even no. So therefore Levi didn't know. Since Levi didn't know, Levi had the right to ask the shayla. Right. But for Gemara, if Levi wasn't told the case of kazayis ukazayis, why did he clear the shayla of the same kazayis that he wanted to eat l'mocher b'chutz? How come Levi didn't ask the simpler shayla? V'tiboyle kazayis ukazayis. Why didn't Levi ask the question of kazayis ukazayis? His Rebbe only told him kazayis. No, the Bavloi asked. But the Shaila that Levi asked his Rebbe, Levi only asked his Rebbe if someone said, Chishiv lechal kazayis lemocher b'chutz. How come Levi didn't ask what if it was kazayis or kazayis? Because Rebbe didn't tell him that Allah. So why did he ask a tifur to Shaila? Why didn't he ask his Rebbe what would Rebbe hold for kazayis or kazayis? No, listen to this. Levi was a major chacham, and this was the godless. I bet you the godless of Levi that Rebbe was trying to highlight was that the shaila that you asked, it may not be such a godless shaila, but the fact that you chose this shaila over the shaila of kazayis or kazayis, that shows you're a gavaltic guy. And for that, you deserve to be Talmid Hashavua. Why? Because listen to this. V'tiboyle kazayis or kazayis. Why didn't Levi ask his Rebbe, what's the halacha of kazayis or kazayis? The teretz is, Sovar, if I want to ask him a shayla on one case, and from his answer on the one case, I'll be able to figure out the answer for both cases. That's chachma. Ask a pivotal question that when you get the answer to that question, you'll answer not only the direct shayla that you have, but even the auxiliary shayla that you should have discussed. And let's see how it would work out. The iba'ina kazayis ukazayis. If I would have asked my Rebbe, what's the halacha about kazayis ukazayis? If the answer would have been if he said kazayis is a case where it's klala, meaning Rabbi Yehuda would be moida that it's not pigel, well then I would have known kazayis l'mocher b'chutz. Surely that's a blended kavod. So if he answered me one way, yes, I would have got both answers. But ali amar li prata, if Rabbi would have answered that Kazayis Ukazayis, Rabbi Yehuda argues, which is in fact what we say is true. Akati Kazayis Lamocher B'chutz Kamiboili. I won't have the answer, so I couldn't ask him that shaila. So Frank Gemara, so that's why I had to ask him the shaila of Kazayis Lamocher B'chutz. But Frank Gemara, but they have the same problem. It's the same thing. If he would have said that's still two individual kavanas and there would be pigel, well, conjugate kazayis ukazayis. Eli amar like klala, so then weiter akati kazayis ukazayis meboile. Zogt the Gemara so beautifully. If by kazayis ukazayis, if by kazayis ukazayis the halacha is that it's a blend, then he would have gotten angry at me. When my Rebbe would have answered me, he would have answered with a little bit of frustration, and he would have said, "Hashda kezayis ukazayis kalala." If even kezayis ukazayis, Rabbi Yehuda's moida kezayis l'mocha b'chutz miboyi. So from the fact that Rebbe answered Levi in a calm way, that it's considered an eruv, but he answered in a calm way. Vice the choice, he held you shouldn't have asked me the shaila by kazayis ukazayis, because by kazayis ukazayis it would not be an eruv, and Rabbi Yehuda would still maintain that there is an isur pigel daraisa. Because if by kazayis ukazayis Rabbi Yehuda would be moida, when my Rebbe would have answered me on my shaila kazayis l'machal b'chutz, he would have said, of course it's eruv. And then I would have known that he meant that. So from the fact that his Rebbe answered him calm, he was able to get an answer to two shilas. Sai that l'mocher b'chutz is eruv, and sai that kazayis ukazayis is not eruv. That is mamish gevaltik. So Zokt Rashi, one important thing, the third line from the top on Rashi over here, ubay nipshit, and now we have the answer to our question. The beinin l'il kazayis tan, the kazayis ukazayis nan. We know for sure Shema Minat the Kazayis Ukazayis none, because Rebbe told his son Reb Shimon, I told you Kazayis Ukazayis. I just didn't tell the Levi. But Levi was able to figure that out by asking his one shaila that was such a well-placed shaila, well nuanced, that he got all the information out of me by watching my facial expression when I told him the answer to that shaila. This is a Gemara that's off the charts.
But this is a Rebbe.
I'll tell you why I love this.
Levi didn't have any.
But I'll tell you why I love this Gemara, because Rebellion. I had a guy in my class who was a mushkas b'midas. He was a son of a. Today he's a rebbe in a Hashavua yeshiva. I don't know what's happening to his talmidim, but the guy's a mushkas of a mushkas. And I got him back at then because he was dying for one of the errant boys. And my sister asked me information about him, and he called me and to push the shidduch. I said, "Oh, I'm going to push it. I'm going to push it so far away, you're not going to know it hit you." So I saved my nephew from this horrible guy. Anyway, to this horrible guy, Rebellion Shvei, we used to give chaburis. In Philadelphia Yeshiva, they would break up the besmesh like 20 groups, 5 guys, and then everyone had a rotation to say Chabur. So Revelia spoke once Friday night by a shmuz, because we would go over to his house Friday night, and he said, "A bocher, a mushkis ist zu mir gekommen die Woche, und ich hatte nicht gesagt, es ist mir sehr schwer zuzukriegen, a Chabur von die 5 Wochen, weil sie sind gar nicht zu verstehen können, die reden zu der Wand. Will ich ihm sagen, da, sitzt da heint, und ich kann nicht sagen, wer der ist. Aber ich will ihm sagen, da, bei dieselbe Woche, wo es von euch passt es nicht zuzukriegen nach Chabur, bei dieselbe Woche durch Muttern sind Schatten kriegen man sich. Der Woche ist ein Muschris Bemides. That's what he said. The Woche is a Muschris Bemides. No, to prove what a Muschris was, he came over to me and said it was me. So Mamaila guy made a mistake like that, and he gets hit. Kedara, I won't run him off, but he was proud of it. He came up to say, "You know who that was? It was me." Like I was flabbergasted. So Erdstolziert with his mushchas and meters. Right. So this was the guy, but he's a big, huge guy. But he's the guy that, you know what I'm saying. So anyway, so Revelio gave a whole shmooze, and he says, "You know, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, when he prepared a shir, do you know he prepared a shir in front of a mirror? Why did he prepare a shir in front of a mirror? Because he wanted to make sure that his facial expressions, as he said, Ed Shtickle, was perfect to convey the message that he wanted to convey. So when I heard it from Belly, I'm thinking, okay, sure, it's a little over the top. It's not over the top. You see that Levi was medayik from his Rebbe's expression and his tone of voice, and he learned a whole new shaila. He learned that Kazayis, Rabbi Yehuda maintains its puddle.
Well, we have
so
no proof.
Chaim Shmulevitz learned it from Levi.
But we have no proof that Levi actually had this intention. The beauty of the Rebbe.
Oh,
Rebbe that
oh, you
did
see
it.
what he's saying? A Rebbe has to see
Maybe-
schus in the
Maybe
sun.
he's not in the Gemara at all. He just went and said
If I
one
cared,
thing.
Reb Shimon held that Levi shouldn't be Talmid Hashavua. He's a garnish.
Yeah.
But look how the Rebbe sees the best in the Talmud.
That's right.
Wow.
Never asked him.
Wow. It would could die the whole thing just to hear that. A Rebbe knows how to bring out the best in his Talmud, and he sees good in his Talmud. His Talmud says, yeah, I wish that's
Yeah,
an
he had his son. His son was probably a friend of his.
Mhm.
And he goes,
But
"Why-"
yes,
That's gewaltig. That is.
that's why in bris they go. You know, they don't say where they go.
What do they do by a bris?
They go. You know, they say these words you're supposed to understand. They make these sounds. I can't if you
Who
hear
makes
it.
these sounds?
Like when they learning, you know, it's a
Oh,
bar
bris.
bris.
It's talking by a bris.
Bris,
Oh,
yeah.
They kick it and hack it. I hear. Gewaltig. Schkoich.
Well,
Okay, jemand hat einen Assen, der geht ein Kvittel.